Welcome to my talk or presentation about the anatomy of CC licenses. At the outset, just so that I don't forget, let me make sure to say that I placed this work into the public domain with a cc0 license. What this means, we will find out a bit later in the course of this presentation. So back to the anatomy of a CC license. A CC license has actually, you can think of that as 3 layers, and each layer has their own use. Usually if you see a CC license and basically follow the URL or click on the link nearby, you end up with the license deed, or commons deed as it's also called. And this is actually a human readable short summary of the license. So it's meant for the layperson to get a quick understanding what such a license entails, what it means. At the outset, it spells out the freedoms that you have. In this case, or all licenses have the freedom to share. And then there may be other additional freedoms. Here, for example, we have the freedom to adapt the work that this license is attached to. So these are the freedoms. And then following that are basically your obligations. And a bit below there are also notices. One standard notices, or one of the notices that you find on all licenses adheres to exceptions and limitations. We will talk about that later as well. And one other important aspect that can be easily missed is that all these Creative Commons licenses, they operate within copyright law. And basically the notice also gives you a reminder about that. So there are other laws that might apply to work, like trademark law, let's say, or moral rights. But basically it's your responsibility to check that and adhere to them. And again, Creative Commons operates within copyright law. This is one of the fundamental principles. So this is the human readable layer that you see here. And if you dig in a sense a bit deeper, so this is or you can look at it as the tip of the iceberg, so to speak. And if you look, let's say, below the surface, then you encounter the legal code or the legal text, the actual contract, so to speak. And this is legal language, it's legalese. It's not meant for the layperson per se, but still it's highly recommended and important to, I would say, to at least read through it, skim through it, and get a basic understanding how such a license looks like it. And all in all, it's a lot longer, of course, than the tip of the iceberg, what you see on the left. And this, by the way, also doesn't show the whole legal contract. It goes on a bit longer, and I omitted that. But, let's say if you get a strong coffee, and you should be able to make it through and get a basic understanding. So this is the second layer, so to speak. And another layer that also not too many people are aware of is, it's also a bit gibberish, but this is actually machine readable gibberish. So it's a special formatting. And this is just one example how things can be formatted. The nice thing about this is you as a human, usually you don't see this and you don't, in a sense, have to care about this. But what you should know is that there is a way to embed this human readable, this machine readable information into a document. So for example, what you see here is could be embedded in a PDF document. And this would tell, so to speak, the machine, or let's say a search engine, what license applies to this PDF document. And again, it looks pretty much like gibberish, but still, if you look closely, you can still make out useful stuff. So it's not totally opaque. So, for example, here we have let's say, most importantly, we have a tag or something that is called license. And lo and behold, there's actually a URL that points to a buy 4.0 license. So from that perspective, it's not so intimidating if you look at these things, if you just look for certain keywords, and you can pull out some information there. Another example is you see something like there's a CC attribution name, John Doe. So this is the author. And if you want to do proper attribution, then John Doe should be used. And here we have the title of the work. Same idea. So to summarize, again, we have these three layers. We have the machine readable layer, which is especially useful for embedding in documents like PDF or websites. And this information is in the document, but is hidden from the human. Then we have the legal layer, so to speak. This is the actual legal contract of the license. And then we have the tip of the iceberg, which is basically for quick human consumption and understanding of the license. Basically a reminder. The cliff notes. Lovely. Now, with that out of the way, let's look at the individual license elements. That's how they are called. Please keep that in mind, license elements. And we have 4 of them, so it's not too involved or too complicated. And these 4 license elements, they have icons, as you can see, but you can also just call them by name. The short versions of these are buy, share alike, non-derivative or no derivatives, and non-commercial. And if you're, let's say, goody two-shoe and want to please the teacher, you can also spell them out. Buy is also attribution, share alike, again non-derivatives, no derivatives. So sometimes you see it written like this, no derivs, but that applies to older licenses, so better don't use it. So better use ND or no derivatives. And then we have non-commercial. And going from left to right, the attribution requirement basically says that you have to name the author and provide also basically a way to find the work. The share alike requirement is about the licensing that you have to apply if you should make basically derivative work. And the non-derivs or non-derivatives requirement is that basically you cannot simply make an adaptation of the work. So it has to, in a sense, stay as it is. And non-commercial is just what it says. So you cannot, let's say, the easiest interpretation is you cannot directly make money off this work with this license. So perhaps important to, or one way to understand these license elements is that the share alike applies basically to the licensing terms themselves. So this basically governs the new license that you attach to the work. It has to be identical. The non-derivative requirement actually talks about, in a sense, the content of the work. You cannot adapt or modify it, and the non-commercial talks about the use of the work. So in a sense, these are also three, in a sense, different, let's say, orthogonal use cases. Again, you have the work itself with the non-derivative that's in a sense affected. You have the license of the adapted work that is affected with the share alike, and then you have, in a sense, the use of the work. Is it commercial or not that is affected? And again, attribution, that is something, as we will see in a moment, that is actually part of every one of the licenses. You always have to give attribution with a Creative Commons license. The other license elements you can, in a sense, mix and match. But one thing should be also is good to know from the outset. If you look at these two guys, the non-commercial and the no derivative, let's say, requirement of the license, these guys, they do not like each other. They do not match. You can think of it as, excuse me, that was a mistake. I meant the share. Where do we have the share alike? Here we have the share alike button. So share alike and non-derivatives, they don't like each other. So you can think about that like share alike is basically, or let's say a simple way to think about this is share alike is viral and non-derivative is sterile, and they don't like each other. So we can mix and match these license elements, but again, not any way we want. And as a result, we don't get too many license types, luckily. So, and I can take away that we only get 6 different license types. And all of these license types, they have the attribution or the buy requirement. And we've got 6 of them. So then what do we do with the other guys? Well, first of all, the buy or attribution requirement can just sit by itself. That's perfectly okay. And this, in again, gives you the most permissive license. If you attach, let's say, other or additional constraints to the license, you can do that individually. Let's say you can use a share alike on top, or you can use a non-derivative on top, or you can use a non-commercial on top if you like. Then you can also add basically additional elements. You can say we have the non-commercial requirement, but we also might want to add a non-derivatives to that, if you like, or we can have the non-commercial requirement and add on top of that the share alike requirement. So these are the 6 licenses, and it takes a bit, I guess, to wrap your thinking around that. But in a sense, all of these, let's say, requirements, they add conditions. So what's also interesting, if you look at the licenses, you have half of the licenses that have the non-commercial requirement, and in fact, this non-commercial requirement, you can think of that as being orthogonal. So you can, in a sense, always attach that or take that away to an existing license. So if you take it here away, I end up with the simple buy license that we have on top already. If I take that guy away, I have this license, and if I take it away here, then I have this license. So again, truly orthogonal. Well, But we're not quite done yet, because we have even more, well, I wanted to say licenses, but that's not quite true, because what I'm presenting you now are not licenses. Let's come back to the cc0 that I used at the very beginning to basically mark this presentation with. This cc0 mark or mechanism is a way for me, as the owner of the copyrighted work, to place it into the public domain, at least in as much as I can legally do. So there might be, depending on the jurisdictions, that might not, in a sense, work perfectly. But all in all, basically, I declare with this mark that I place the work into the public domain as much as I'm possible or able to do so. And what's important is that it has to be my work, so I have to be the copyright owner. And this also applies to the licenses that I just showed you. Then there's another similar mark, but not to be confused. And this is basically a way to mark an existing work that is in the public domain, and in a sense make that more apparent. So in a sense, I rubber stamp the work, so to speak. I have an existing work. I'm not the author of the work, but I, let's say, did my research and found out that it's in the public domain, and so I slap this stamp on it, in a sense rubber stamp it, and declare to the world, I believe this is in the public domain. So at the beginning, pretty much at the beginning of the talk, I talked about the idea of exemptions, and this is actually also hidden in the notices there. And let's talk a bit more about this exceptions and limitations of copyright work. So let's assume we have this lake here, and everything that lives within the lake is a copyrighted work. So a bunch of copyrighted works, but also what also lives in this lake can be works that are under the CC license, because if you've already learned, CC license works operate within the copyright law. So, but then what we also have, and this is part of copyright law, we have this nice little island here. And this little island gives us dry land, so in a sense copyright cannot reach it. And this nice dry land you can think of as the exceptions and limitations of copyright law. And part of these exceptions and limitations is actually fair use or fair dealings, depending on the country you're in. Not all countries have fair use or fair dealing concepts, but no matter what, if you're on this island, on dry land, then you're in a sense out of the reach of copyright. And if that's the case, then you have more rights, you have more options in a sense than what the copyrighted work entails. And the same holds for the Creative Commons licenses. They are less restricted than copyright, so you can think of copyright as all rights reserved. And then we have Creative Commons, which you can think of some rights reserved. But if you are on the island and if you can basically invoke fair use or these exceptions and limitations, then that typically means that you have even more rights that you're allowed to do. And Creative Commons or the licenses basically they make this clear they don't want to hide that from you. They basically say, if you're within this fair use or this exceptions and limitations realm or on this island, then you can use that work without bothering about the Creative Commons license. And the same holds for copyrighted works. So that's pretty much about it. Let me close with one other thought, in the sense that all of these icons that you've seen, you may wonder, what about these guys? Are they under copyright, or how are they treated, let's say? And I also wanted to know this for this presentation, because as you see here, I used them quite extensively. And as it turns out that these all of these icons that you see, they're actually are trademarks of Creative Commons. And that means that the Creative Commons trademark policy applies to them. And so what does this trademark policy say? One important thing to know is that perhaps interestingly or surprisingly, these trademarks are not licensed under Creative Commons license. And this makes sense from that perspective. Let's say if you have a Creative Commons icon that you use to mark a license, it would be a bit cumbersome to attach a notice down there and say let's say in this case non-commercial icon by Creative Commons is under the following Creative Commons license, and then you link to that license. So that would be a bit cumbersome, and so I guess the trademark policy gives you a way around that. But that doesn't mean that you can use these icons in any way you want. Quite the opposite, because one other aspect is that Creative Commons in the trademark policy says that these icons that you've seen, they should be so only used to basically apply them for the licensing use. And that gets, at the beginning, that gets you thinking and say, hey, can I make actually a presentation like this using the icons? But a bit further down in the trademark policy, a few paragraphs, they have an additional, let's say, clarification, and that applies to the descriptive use of these icons. And what it essentially says, you are allowed to use these icons for explanatory materials. And I think that's exactly what I did in this presentation, so I'm in the clear. Lovely. So thanks for watching, and thanks for bearing.